Today's show is sponsored by the 2019 season of Savage Race. Typically around this time of year, Savage sends me some new copy to read, and then I add my own, personal flair as I do for the host read, as they're called here in podcast land. But you know what? I'm going 1,000% MBD on this one because I love Savage Race. I've been running Savages since 2012. They know me by first name. They know my kids by first name. First of all, Savage takes the cake for the We Care Award. They put on great races, and you can feel that love, but also if there's ever been any issues, they always take care of it. They always take care of their customer. I just love how they do that. They continue to innovate. Every year they throw at least a couple new obstacles in there. They're super fun. I really love Savage Race. This year, they're up in the game on the Blitz. That's their new short course, so you can win the classic Savage distance race on Saturday, then the short course on Sunday to double up. Ladies and gentlemen, I love Savage Race. Please go check out their races. Everyone says, oh, they won't come to the West Coast. You know why? Because they're not idiots. They can't just move overnight across the country. It's expensive. We all know what happened to the last company that tried to do that. This could be the longest host read ever. I love Savage Race. Check out SavageRace.com.
Yeah! Get up!
Welcome to the Obstacle Racing Media Podcast with Matt B. Davis.
With over 300 episodes since 2012, Matt has produced the most consistent podcast in OCR.
Each episode, Matt speaks with race directors, athletes, and industry insiders to bring you the most in-depth interviews and conversations in the world of obstacle racing,
adventure runs, and ultra marathons. If you have small children nearby, now is the time to put on some headphones
or send them off to watch Phineas and Ferb, as there are occasionally four-letter words,
which are not bleeps. Now, here is your host.
Now here is your goddamn host.
Now here's your host, fucking Matt B. Davis.
Good day, everyone. Welcome back to the Obstacle Racing Media Podcast. I'm your host, Matt B. Davis. No, your ears and eyes are not deceiving you. I know it's Wednesday, and we usually get episodes on Tuesday and Thursday, and we already got an episode on Tuesday, and we know Davis and Chase is coming tomorrow, so what is today but a bonus episode? Today's show is with, I'm calling him the great Kevin Beck. I don't know if he's going to like that. I don't know if anybody's ever called him that before, but that's what I titled the file that I saved. I put it as the great Kevin Beck. Kevin Beck, no idea who this guy was, began reading some things that he wrote and was like, this guy's kind of like me. Like I think I might turn out in 20 years. Really straight shooter, really could give a fuck about what you think in terms of just laying it down. I'm sure he cares what you think somewhat, but in terms of, political correctness or certainly the current trend of what things are and aren't. And it specifically affected me around a project I was working on, and you're going to hear all about that. But I wanted to get this up now because there's so much going on. And, we're right in the middle of the season here, and I don't know when I could get this up on its own like a regular Tuesday. So here we're getting this bonus episode of Kevin and I on a Wednesday via Skype-ish a few weeks ago. And he's a great guy, and I hope you read his stuff, and we'll link it and all that fun stuff. Away we go.
I come across to someone who doesn't know me and therefore has to Google and can only piece together, where's this guy coming from? Because I'm actually really curious to see how what I write comes across. I don't mean, does this guy like it? Am I impressing people? I'm more like, what actually is the message, if there is one, coming across? Or does it just sound like, ranting? Or am I being completely misunderstood because I'm not saying what I think I'm saying? So,
well, the message
talks to a lot of people. So that's why I was really interested. And there's also a big reason why I wasn't particularly concerned about having an agenda, like whatever you want to talk about.
Right. Well, the message definitely spoke to me. The message definitely spoke to me, and I want to get to it. But I feel like I want to save some Googling of my listener and kind of bring them up to speed a little bit. So, it's funny. I actually just hit record, which I never do. I almost start before we start talking, so I don't miss anything. And I missed that great question I asked you about being ornery, which is fine. I'm not going to ask you again. I'll explain at the beginning of my show, but I'll just say, were you a bright-eyed, running is great, I love everything about it and this community at one point before wait a minute, this isn't all what it's cracked out to be started?
Okay, so I started when I was in high school. I was always one of those kids that probably had some aptitude for running. I wouldn't say a whole lot of talent, honestly, but I was one of those kids when they made you run in gym class, I would actually try.
Right.
we always had the 600-yard run. I don't know if they still do the presidential fitness test, but I would train for stuff like that. The presidential physical fitness test, it had 6 events: 600-yard run, shuttle run, 50-yard dash, I think pull-ups, sit-ups.
Considering the state of our country's fitness and president, probably neither of those things are around anymore. But I digress.
Yeah, probably not. That's probably more, Big Mac oriented. But so I messed around with a bunch of different sports as a kid. I mean, the only one that I think I showed any real potential in was soccer. But going into 9th grade, I knew I would not make the varsity soccer team. And I didn't want to play JV. And my mom actually suggested I go out for cross country. And nobody else in my family was a runner. My mom did some jogging when I was a little kid. I remember that. But so I had about 1 week of warning that I was going to become a runner. So I convinced my best friend to come out for the team with me. And he was this kid who he did bicycle motocross and smoked weed with his older brother occasionally. So neither one of us, he just kind of agreed to do it with me. And we were the only 2 freshmen on the team. But anyway, I really took to it because, of course, you can quantify running for whatever degree you want to. In fact, to a crippling degree nowadays with GPS and just the data overload. So I just came at it from a mathematical perspective. And anyway, but to answer your question more directly, yeah, I think that lacking the internet in those days, running was another community in which you only talk to other runners. And so they would reinforce your positive bias about it. Like if you met runners and talked to them, you would hear how nice runners were and how goal-oriented and how driven. And that's mostly true, I guess. But in the 80s, most people who ran were trying to hit certain times. And I'm not saying, there's a little more, there's not a whole lot of truth to the notion that everybody who used to run was really hardcore and there was none of this just running to finish. I mean, people have always run for fitness. Not everybody wants to go out and run a whatever, 30-minute 10K, 40-minute, 50-minute. But the whole participation phenomenon of marathons, like wanting to do one as sort of some yuppie self-actualization phenomenon. And I'm not, when I shit on something, sometimes I get this feedback like, well, if you don't like it, you don't have to do it. Or why are you trying to keep people from doing? I'm not calling for the extinction of things just because I complain about them. And that's kind of hard for people to internalize because not everything is a position essay. I mean, I may be just offering an opinion, but I don't see any real need to change a lot of things. I mean, like the economics of running are what they are now, like all these rock and roll marathons that are basically these huge events that have really ruined it for competitive people in some ways. Like course certification, it should be a no-brainer, right? That should be one of the things that everybody gets right in a road race. Obviously not in an obstacle race and other things where the competitive experience, you're just doing different things. But I think that I used to ponder when I was younger and in my prime and approaching my prime, what's gonna happen in 20 years? Like I never figured I would quit running because I always had the sense that I had a psychological need to do it, or at least to exercise. But at the same time, I've always been focused on, trying to improve my times. For years, I was, I had a good shot at reaching the Olympic trials in the marathon. It used to be 2:22 for men, and now it's 2:19. So my best was 2:24. So that gave me something to do for a good number of years.
I'm kind of surprised that it's only a couple seconds. I think these qualifying times are getting so much faster. I thought you were going to say it used to be much more.
I think that when they first established the 2:22, it was in the 80s, and I think what they basically did was they looked at the 100th fastest time in maybe 83 or 84, one of those years, and they established a cutoff based on roughly 100th place or something, because they figured about 100 was a reasonable size for the trials field, and so that's where they happened upon that. And right about the time where I got way too old to stand any real chance or was getting there, they moved it to 2:19. So it may sound funny to some people. I mean, the median marathon time now, I think for men is about 4.5 hours and about the same for women. So for me to say that the difference between 222 and 219 was sort of a deal breaker. May sound weird because 3 minutes doesn't sound like a whole lot, I don't think, to some people. But when you've been running 100 miles a week or whatever for quite a while, and you know how much you've probably got left to improve by whatever means, 3 minutes is actually a lot. That's
No, I know it's a lot. I know it's a
that's
lot, but I'm saying I thought it would be
Yeah.
maybe it was 2:30 before or something. I just know that they've gotten so much faster every year recently, so I just thought it would have been a little bit slower before.
Yeah, it was funny because when it was still 222, going into right after the year 2000, and I think it was 2008 when they changed, but whatever the case, there was always a group of people that suggested, well, why not 230? It's a road race. You could have more people in there. But it was usually guys who would run, about 230 that were saying that. Surprise, surprise. I actually would have been disappointed if they had moved it to a slower time because I was so focused on reaching that 222 that had they bumped it to 230 and sort of grandfathered me in based on times that I had already run, I honestly would have been disappointed because that would have been too easy.
Well, can we back up a little bit?
Yeah.
Why can't the Rock and Roll Marathon bring in 30,000 people at a city and make whatever money they make, and those people think it's a great time and get a big honking medal, and you can go compete somewhere else. You can go compete at New York or Boston or any way that you think that you should compete. Why have they ruined it, air quotes?
Are you saying that that people who are complaining about them can race elsewhere?
Well, that's what you said. You said they ruined it for competitive racing.
They part of that is just economics. Like, it's not really, you can't really blame the race if they attract so many people just because of a rise in general interest in running in this country. That's good for them. If people are used to the whole idea that races they are in are going to have that many people, then that's their baseline experience. Yeah, there's no shortage of races to go to if you don't want to put up with that or put up with the risk of a mismeasured course. Or it's basically a matter of those huge races put a lot of resources into stuff that was formerly not even on the table. Like when I started running, the whole idea that they would have to have basically a buffet at the finish line to make people happy, or some shitty band at every mile to keep people going. And that seemed so foreign that that was not part of my race experience from the start. So I can't really appreciate people wanting or expecting that.
So wait a minute, you're saying that they spend a lot on the accoutrement, but they get the course measurement wrong?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's always the course certification. I think what happens more often, based on what I've seen, is that the course might be set up right, but when they actually execute it, they manage to put cones in the wrong place, or they don't run the course as it's certified, maybe. That happened with Rock and Roll Denver. I think the last 2 years, the half marathon, the 1 mile mark was off. Like everybody's GPS watches were going off simultaneously, but, and then the mile mark came up 30, 45 seconds later, something like that, whatever. And I just think that, okay, so these people are trying to provide an experience for their core entrants. And when you have a race of 30,000 people, a great many of them, a very high fraction, are sort of just wanting to finish the race. They don't really care about their time. And those who, they want it to be accurate, but let's say it's 13.2 or 13.0. Most people who want to say they ran a half marathon are not going to be all that worried if it was actually a little bit off of that. But for someone who's serious about their time, that kind of a slight difference it actually makes a big difference in the end. Like if a course of a tenth of a mile long and you're running, say, 6 minute pace, then you're going to be off by, 40 seconds, slower by 40 seconds. And to some people, that's a lot. Or some people are just annoyed when things are wrong because they should be right. Even if it's sort of inconsequential and no one's going to die because you just ran a race that's not quite right. But it's vexing to me that all this effort is put into making sure, like I said, costume people dancing along the course, or, instead of just having bagels and bananas at the finish line, like really appealing food, or just things that other people demand that were never in demand when people were running mostly to see how fast they could run or see if they could beat their friends from the office, during the week or whatever. It's just a different landscape now, and there's no getting away from that. There's no putting that back in the bottle. And I think that's fine. Like, I can't condemn people for just wanting to take part in some event where they get a medal and they get to show off their medal. And that's what I joke about that a lot, but I actually didn't realize, even from the very start, when I joke about people saying they just want their finisher's medal, that kind of stuff is really important to people. Like, you look at Instagram and people are just so wed to the idea of having this gym crack after you complete a race that you'd swear they just got back from Afghanistan or somewhere. It's like, well, no, you willingly, I mean, yeah, it's difficult.
Dude, you're talking and you're talking about regular running. Like, imagine, so my industry, obstacle racing, is the sport that social media built. If people couldn't show, look what I just did, right, in the mud, in the whatever, and hold up this giant thing, I don't think we would have gotten off the ground to the extent that we did.
No, but I think that those things are more deserving of medals. I mean, if you really want to score that, I remember when I was running cross country in high school. Of course, every track race is the same. Well, tracks vary a little bit from surface to surface, but 1,600 meters is 1,600 meters. So you didn't really have a different experience going to a different track, although some of them were actually cinder back then. But anyway, cross country, of course, we'd go to these meets at smaller high schools, and sometimes the courses were like basically road races. But other times they were so challenging, you had to wonder if it was actually like if the school could have gotten sued for having courses like this. Like, we went across some creek that had been sort of washed out, and there was a high risk of a sprain. But it was only natural for me to think. I did most of my running on trails in the summer, to train. So where's the limit for this stuff? Like, how hard can they make it and still have it be considered a cross-country race? I remember thinking, I would talk to my friends like, okay, well, we can have some of this on trails, but it can't be such a horrible trail that it's like a 30% grade and people can't really scale it without going hand over foot, Or what if it wasn't all running? What if you had to cross some like monkey bars to get across? What if it wasn't just a little 3-foot stream you could leap across? What if it was a legitimate small river? And you had to navigate that somehow. So I think that things like Tough Mudder and obstacle course racing are a natural outcropping of cross-country running. So I like that those events are there, even though I've never done one, because I didn't really race until last year for about 13 years or so. I kind of stopped racing in my mid-30s when I knew I wasn't going to get any faster. I never stopped running, but when I came back to competitive running, a lot of things were really different. But at the same time, even though I wasn't racing all those years, I was still writing for running magazines and working with people and coaching people. So it was this schizophrenic thing where, even though I wasn't in it myself, I was watching all these changes and absorbing them secondhand. And I think those events are really cool. But the interesting thing is they've perhaps siphoned off people who I would prefer to see in road races, because they're more competitive and they're there to test themselves really hard. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong, again, with like just walking 13 miles if you want to, but it brings a certain discipline and energy to an event when you are lining up and you sort of understand that no one's there just to fuck around and, walk 3 abreast to get to the finish line, like high school cross country or college. Like, when you're running on a team, you started running as an adult, right? I mean, how old were you when you started?
Well,
I read your bio.
Well, interestingly enough, I did run cross country in high school because I knew I wasn't a sprinter, but I liked running. But I quit like after the second meet, and it's one of my few regrets in life, because then I didn't run again until I was 40 and sort of, found that love again for it.
When did you graduate from high school? What year?
1990.
Okay, so I'm going to throw a couple names at you that I actually remember, because Brockton used to come.
Oh, but I was already down here by then. I was already in the South.
Okay. Plus, it's such a huge school. They had a couple of, I mean, they usually has reasonably good teams, but it would be kind of hard not to with a graduating class of 1,000 people.
Right.
I think it would better at football. But anyway, try to imagine, even with your limited experience, like having teammates before the race who are just sort of like, I just want to finish, and having, if you like needed to stop and walk to get to the finish line, like in a high school cross country race, imagine how that would have gone.
Not well.
So that whole mentality brings a different energy to a race.
But here's the thing. We've got the exact same thing in obstacle racing in terms of there are people that line up in the morning, right? Shirtless guys and women in sports bras. And then the rest of the day is age groupers and regular people. And it's always one of the things I say I like about it, because if I want to test myself, I can do that, right? So a guy like me will run in the morning, go really hard and fast. Hey, let's see if I can. It's not really PRs because the courses are all different, but it's can I get all the obstacles? Can I do well in my age group, whatever it is? And then in the afternoon, I've got my neighbor who's never run one before, so I'm going to kind of slow jog it with him, or my kids, or my mom, right? Or the guys at the office, right? Or there's so many, I can just choose to have some A races and some that I just do funsy laps av. Now for me, I admittedly, like I've done my last burpee, right? Like Spartan makes you do burpees if you miss. Like I'm not that guy anymore. I much rather do the fun. I call them media laps. I bring my GoPro, you know what I mean? I'm having fun. And then once or twice a year, I pick an A race and I'm like, all right, I'm going to try to kick ass at this today. So I think that's what I like about it.
I could see that. And I think that, because when I started running, it was really all about times and competition, everything. It's hard for me to allow myself to relax and treat it like that. Now, I don't know if it would be easier if it were obstacle racing, like you said. I was thinking about that last night. Like, yeah, if you did the same course more than once and you could have course PRs, but even then, I would think that conditions can vary so much.
Everything changes. Even if they go back to the same location, they want to mix it up because they know that they're going to have many of the same, 6,000 people. So they pride themselves on mixing it up.
In a way like the Tour de France, right? Because it's a 20 or 21 stage event every year, but they don't even have it on the same exact route. I don't know how much overlap they have from year to year. But the whole notion of a personal best is sort of out the window. And in a way, I think that can be a relief because now, I did some races when I was faster where I'd run with other people and pace them and everything. But to enter and then not really push myself was a foreign concept. So I have a hard time now adopting that mentality, even though I see other people doing that and enjoying it and having fun. So I realize that issue is totally in my head. It's personal.
No, and I've met a lot of people like that who I'll have this conversation and they'll say, well, I'm not very in shape. And I'm like, listen, you're going to see some really obese people out there. Trust me, you're in better shape than most. And they go, yeah, but I want to do really well. I'm not someone that can just go out there and have fun. And I'm like, all right, well, if you can't have fun, then I can't really help you. But I think you should just try to have fun and see what happens. And that's usually kind of what happens. I mean, I don't think anyone can run a 5 or 10K for fun, right? It's just too short. But once you get into halves and fulls, it's like, like I just spoke to someone yesterday who is competitive. And she's running Boston for the first time. And she's like, listen, I kind of want to enjoy it. Like she's still faster than 90% of the field. But she's like, I want to high five kids. I want to see the towns. I've never done it. Maybe next year when I qualify, I'll see how I can do.
That's a good idea at Boston because I think that's the holy grail of everyday runner marathons, right? Qualifying for that. The standards obviously aren't on a par with making a national championship team, but they're not easy. And they've gotten harder. I think that the male open standard might be going to 3 hours flat from 3:05, I think.
They're hard. They're hard. All I know is I'm not getting in until I'm 60 or 70. That's at this point. Right.
Then you have to game it and try to age more slowly. And I think that it's set up that if you kind of hang around long enough and your physical decline is sort of a physiological normal, then you sort of approach getting in by, I don't want to say default because there's no such thing as defaulting your way into a marathon time, but I know what you're saying. But that is a good marathon to actually enjoy once you're in, because I think people lose sight of the fact that in trying to qualify for Boston, they don't appreciate what a nightmare it can be to try to run well there. Like, that's where my personal best is. But I always ran it as a local, and I was in the elite field 3 of the 4 times I ran it, or at least they have 2 different levels of elite. So I got to stay in the Korean Church of Hopkinton before the start. And this is back when it started at noon. So I would get a ride home or a ride down there from Concord, New Hampshire.
Concord.
Yeah. So about, that's 90 minutes from Hopkinton that morning, and then and run the thing. And it wasn't a logistical, I didn't have to, stay in a hotel and get bussed out to the start from the city. If you're an everyday runner and you are running, I don't know, if you're in the 10th corral, you have to find a place to stay in Boston for probably, I don't know, $300 a night. And then you get bussed out. It's a point-to-point course. You get bussed out to Hopkinton. You sit there outside. There's really nowhere. You can't go inside. I don't think they have Hopkinton High School. Limited number of people can go in there. You run the race. It's all these corrals. You start on a 2-lane ordinary state highway. So the notion of going there and improving your time, if you got in with, unless you're really close to the front, and plus it's not, I don't think of it really as a PR course for most people. Especially the longer you're out there, the more those downhills in the beginning are going to hurt you. Because if you're fast enough, by the time you get to the backside of Heartbreak Hill, if you've paced yourself well, you've only been out there for an hour and a half to 2 hours late in the race. Your legs are probably not going to not be turned to hamburger at that point. Everyday runners anyway, if you go there, I know that people, when they want to qualify for Boston, they're so focused on that once it comes time to go and show up, they haven't really considered the various downsides to being in that particular race, like sitting outside before the start, not being able to just drive there, get back in your car at the finish line. So planning for that and sort of counting on enjoying it and maybe high-fiving the kids. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of people along the course. I mean, there's something like 500,000 people at least that watch it. There's almost no dead spots along the whole thing. It's an amazing experience.
Yeah, my friend David Chandler ran it a few years ago, young man, really fast, and it was one of those rainy mornings, and he froze from sitting around before it started. He ended up DNFing at like 18, I think, or 20, because his body just fucking, not a lot of body fat. And he couldn't get it. I feel really bad for him, right? Because like you said, all that lead up. We have that here. I don't know if you've ever come down for the Peachtree, but it's only 6 miles, but it's the same thing. It's the whole 40,000 people run it, 500,000 people cheer you on. You can certainly run it, elite if you want, but most people, it's maybe you run for the course PR, but it's really just about experiencing that. You go to a barbecue afterwards. It's July 4th, right? Kind of like you guys have Patriots Day. But yeah, that's why I want to run it. And I'm from Boston. I feel like it's kind of my birthright. Like, I got to do it. It's just, I also thought of I think if I can raise 10 grand, I can get in. And I thought about maybe doing that. Although that feels a little weird to me, but I might try that route.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think that, you mentioned the Peachtree. Now, my first marathon was actually the Atlanta Marathon in '94. I was in Atlanta for Peachtree that year, but I didn't do it. But I would not think of that as a fast course anyway, because Atlanta on the 4th of July, I mean, you got to be kidding me.
It's 1,000
like
degrees.
1 year in 20 where they get favorable weather. I think in '95, actually, they got a cool, drizzly day on July 4th. It was sort of the opposite of the 100-year flood.
Right.
Like it was good instead of bad. And that year, somebody ran 27:04 on that course.
Wow.
But and I think that's still the biggest 10K in the country, right?
Oh yeah.
Bigger than the Boulder. The Boulder's the second biggest, and that's out here on Memorial Day.
Yeah.
That's our version too.
Yeah.
But growing up in the Boston TV market, I actually had no appreciation for how rabid most people who run were about wanting to run the Boston Marathon. Like, before I started running as a kid, I would watch, my parents usually watched Channel 4, it was WBZ back then. So I would watch sports, and this is during Bill Rogers' heyday.
Right.
And for days before the race, they would have all this coverage. And I guess my thought was they're just doing this because it's the Boston Marathon and it's Boston and it's kind of a local event and everybody, does it. It wasn't until in my young adult years where I got away from Boston and realized people hold this thing in esteem all around the world.
Right.
Everybody wants to run that race. It's been around forever. And it's kind of funny because there's nothing especially nice about the course. I mean, you run through Framingham and you smell fucking, 8,000 cigarettes worth of secondhand smoke just at one intersection. And Wellesley is nice for the obvious reasons.
You're gonna have to spell this out unless you're afraid of being, politically incorrect.
I'm gonna have to what?
I said you're gonna have to spell that out for the listener unless you want to be politically correct.
Spell what out?
Why it's nice for obvious reasons. Some people who have no understanding of Boston wouldn't know.
Okay, yeah. Well, when you run through Wellesley, that's the loudest part of the course because the Wellesley college student body is out there, and there's something it's something that all the Wellesley students have in common. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's no men. So.
Just a lot of attractive girls screaming for you and some who give out kisses, or does that happen anymore, the kissing?
Okay, but my favorite thing is when I ran it in 2001, that was my fastest year. And so when you run through there, all those women are screaming from the time the first person goes through to the time I get, the back of the Packers are through.
Right.
Just unrelenting energy. And I guess some of them hand out phone numbers and whatever. When I ran it in 2001, so people will say that when they were running through there, they had the sense, I felt like they were cheering just for me.
Right.
Well, in 2001, I was far enough up in the field, so I had separated myself. I think there was someone probably 50 yards in front and somebody 50 yards behind. So technically, when I ran through there into the belly of the beast and was hearing all those screams, they really sort of were yelling just for me. Not really. I mean, they already had been before I got there.
Right.
But that was what my subconscious told me was happening. And it was so loud. I remember unconsciously running right on the crowd of the road, like right on the double yellow line, so I could be equidistant from either side as if they were going to fall into the road and just eat me or something. Because it was so loud. It was almost intimidating. So I remember I cracked a smile, okay? And I was running the race of my life, and I kind of knew it, even though it was only halfway through. I just knew it wasn't probably going to go to hell. So I was sort of in the zone, but, looking from side to side behind my sunglasses and seeing these smiles and these cheers. I remember cracking a smile, and it was almost like I showed red because they see that and they respond by cheering louder. Or maybe not, but this is what I imagined anyway. And so it was just a lot of fun. Like I kind of bookmarked that in my mind for later. Like, remember to tell people that they really were cheering for me. Because there was no other option, right? They didn't fall silent and then start in again when the next guy came past.
Right.
So what else? There's a little dead spot right after Heartbreak on the backside of that. Before 22 miles, there's a cemetery and there's no real room to stand on the side of the road and cheer or something. I can't remember the name of that, but it's really weird because it gets quiet. And the only other point in the course where there's not a lot of people along the side is right in Hopkinton and Ashland at the beginning, because nobody really wants to stand there unless they live there, I guess. So it's really, really crazy. It's a lot of fun.
So before I get into why I reached out to you, what is your best placement at Boston, and what is I know people are interested in this, just sort of your highlight reel of, like, is it on? Are you on Athlinks or Ultra Sign Up or where? Like, I assume like that stuff is recorded somewhere.
If you go to my personal website, I've got all my PRs there. A link in the lower right corner. Yeah, that race is my fastest marathon. And
what about in terms? First of all, by the way, your website is a perfect example of you because it's right out of 1997 or 1999. I love that you have not made it look like a modern site at all.
I have updated it a few times just to reflect like new articles I've written.
Right. And
I steadfastly maintain it's not quite like a GeoCities,
but it's close.
But by design, double entendre there. But yeah, it's it's meant to be just like an assortment of links. And I think if you hover over the links, like they still do that thing where the text gets bold and bigger, so it fucks it up and it makes like, depending on what browser you're using, like the whole thing jumps.
Right. I can imagine. I can imagine what it looks like on my phone. I mean, it looks decent actually on the web, but I mean in terms of like, you know, podium type stuff, not just your PRs, but like what is like your accomplishments that you would mean something to people?
Well, I was second in the national championship one year. Technically, I was second in the US 50K in 2004 when I was kind of on the downside.
Right.
And I was, let's see, I think my best race was actually probably a 51:32 10-miler in California, or a 108 half that was in Lowell, Mass. Beautiful town.
Wait a minute. Now, wait, here you are, second place in Disney with with Goofy cheering you on, and you said you don't like the big Goofy races. No pun intended.
That okay, so the reason I ran that marathon was because I had moved to Florida with my then girlfriend, who was from the Miami area, wanted to go back to school, and so we moved into one side of her parents' duplex outside of Fort Lauderdale, and I discovered that they had a program called Florida's Finest, put on by Florida Running and Triathlon magazine. Florida's Finest, by the way, is kind of an oxymoron when it comes to anything, except for, you know, Florida's Finest weird people. But they had this really cool thing, this magazine, I don't know if it even still exists, but they would select 6 women and 6 men to run the Disney World Marathon in January. Based on your performances, you know, you could apply for this. And they paid for the entire, like a 3 days in a hotel there right on Disney property that would have been even 15 years ago, like $400 a night. I think it was a Coronado Springs hotel or something. A couple of theme park passes. And so I applied to do this just because I didn't think it would be a very fast marathon. And I didn't think I would be in great shape for it anyway. But I was like, well, it'll kind of be worth it. So I didn't actually even know how big it was. I mean, I knew it wasn't a super serious race. There was no prize money. But, you know, it was in Orlando, probably one of the worst cities I've ever been in. Or I guess midpoint of it. Anyway, so long story short, I say long story short all the time after I've just spent like 40 fucking minutes telling the long version. No, it's almost like saying my bad after you've like driven drunk through a crowd of people and stayed out 50. I'm like, wow, that was desperately unsafe, wasn't it? Well, anyway, let's all move on.
My bad, bro.
But anyway, so I actually had a really good race that day. And that's probably the best race photo I'm ever going to have, like that one where I'm finishing and there's Pluto in the background.
Pluto, not Goofy. That's right.
Yeah, everybody says that. I kind of do, but I have a different, smaller photo from that same race where the Goofy was at the finish line.
Right.
You just have to pan out further. So yeah, then Pluto got decommissioned as a planet the following year, so I felt bad. But yeah, so I was a very distant second. They used to have this Brazilian guy who inexplicably showed up for like 7 or 8 straight years, and he would run 2:20 every single year. I don't know why he came, because there was no money.
Trip for his family to Disney?
Who knows? But you know, either way, it was quite an event. They brought in people like Meb and Dina to hang out at the finish line and go to the pre-race stuff. And so I don't know, that Nike had some involvement with that. But either way, yeah, that was my last serious marathon. And so, but the thing is, after the race, the coordinator of the Florida's Finest program wanted everybody who had run to submit sort of a personal essay about their experience for the magazine, which I was more than happy to do, because for one thing, I really did appreciate being, you know, as a non-elite runner, being given a chance to do this. And for another thing, I just kind of like to talk about running. But at the same time, I had to kind of gloss over some things. Ordinarily, I would not have called it a really good marathon. Like the course is not, it's not a good course. It's not a fast course, and it's not a fun course to run on, because you go, if you've ever been down there, like the around 18 miles, you go through the animal kingdom. And so you're actually on the little walkways that are kind of, you know how those things are set up, like the short little humps up and down, almost like a golf course path or golf cart path or something. So when your legs are tired at that point, you're almost on cobblestones. It throws you out of your rhythm. And then you get on the Osceola Parkway out in the open sun right after the sun's come up between like 20 and 24 miles. And so, yeah, you get a good tour of everything and you run through Cinderella's castle with a mile to go. But if you're not used to a marathon being sort of a showcase and you're expecting, you know, I'm waiting for my splits and there's not going to be, you know, you're not expecting to be routed onto just these narrow paths or to be temporarily blinded because your eyes have adjusted to bright sun and then suddenly you're in the darkness, the tunnel of the Cinderella's castle. So I'm not saying there's anything that they did wrong. It's just that kind of a course was just kind of bound to be adversarial if you're a time-focused person who's not used to the introduction of all these factors that are more oriented toward people who are probably running in a group. I remember by the time I got to 13 miles, I was all by myself, and I was on the halfway point is near this access road, like in the back of the park. I come around a corner, and I could see about 80 or 100 yards ahead is this person in a costume, and it was the one from The Bug's Life. So there was just this person in a costume waving at me like this, waiting for me it was a water station. And I'm approaching, and I remember thinking, even in the moment, like, there are no witnesses. Like, whoever's in this costume could shoot me or give me the finger or threaten my life. And there are no witnesses. And so even if I cared to report this later on, they could deny it. And I don't even know who's in there. It could be a senior citizen. It could be a one-legged 12-year-old. So I was just thinking, this is the perfect crime. Like, well, they might know who was stationed out there, but I'm never going to know who was there. But I remember thinking, this is kind of cool because this person could be taking a nap until the crowd comes by.
Sure.
But they're actually like, hey, and I don't even know the character's name. I never saw Bug's Life. Or maybe it was Ants. I don't know. So it was just sort of a different thing. That was kind of my introduction to the whole mass marathon phenomenon. Having these costume people at the water stations and people playing music. I'm not saying any of that is bad or that it never maybe helped me to hear music on the course. It is just different, really different. So now that that's pretty much everywhere you go, the time I took off from running, there were a lot of changes, or from racing. There were a lot of changes, and I was a witness to them as a spectator and as a coach, I guess. But seeing the landscape change that much, it's just like anything else. I mean, the internet was around in 2004, but that was before social media. The internet isn't really the same as it was at all, other than being, universally connected to a backbone somewhere or whatever. But, you try to imagine the internet without Facebook. We got one day of that, and, you would think that the financial system had shut down. Like, that was a day without having to look at everybody's fucking lattes, for... on Instagram. So it was just fun. But I even in the big races that I ran, I didn't have a big sense of how big they were because I usually started, of course, right up at the front without having to work my way through a crowd to get there. So like all the years I ran Boston, it didn't really matter if there were 100 people behind me or 100,000 because I was just focused on the people in front of me. The year I was, my highest place at Boston was 28th. And, technically 29th because I was behind the first woman. And so that was my 15 seconds of quasi fame because I got passed by Catherine DeReba after the 25-mile mark. And she beat me by 32 seconds. And I wasn't even dying that bad. I read later that she ran her last mile in 5:01.
Wow.
Which was probably faster than all of them, but about 4 or 5 men in the race. When she went by me, I had the pretense of trying to keep up for about 4 or 5 steps. And I was like, no. And her and the 4 police escorts or whatever went right by the ESPN bike. So anyway, I think that was another going into the weeds thing. But you were asking me about, the mass marathons in Disney and everything. like a lot of people who are time focused and are pretty close to the front of races, at least percentage wise, if not literally running with the leaders. I was only tangentially aware of stuff going on, not around me. Like the whole idea of running out of water at the water stations was never going to happen to me, or having to fight for, a cup, or having to stop to get water because you're out there with 100 people. I only knew about those things secondhand until I did run the last 11 miles of the Philadelphia Marathon one year with somebody who was back, and he wasn't even that far back. Well, he was a 3:13 guy. So just seeing the sheer carnage, even that far in the back, like late in a marathon, people puking and falling out, getting themselves occasionally. It was almost like a forced road march. Like, the further back in the pack you get, the more people you have who haven't necessarily been able to prepare ideally. And there's no shame in that, but of course it just makes it harder to finish. People whose longest run is 14 miles, are probably going to have a lot of difficulty with 10K left. And some people kind of like that. They want their longest run ever by 10 kilometers at least to be a marathon. So that's one of those things that sounds like a great idea until you're at the 22-mile mark of that marathon, and then you've got hamstring cramps or whatever. But so I don't fully appreciate the appeal of being in any event where you're surrounded by people the whole way, because I just don't like big crowds. So it's almost like that scene in Clerks, if you do the original Clerks, where Randall's going on about how he likes going to parties, and Dante says, "But you hate people." And Randall's like, "Yeah, but I love gatherings." Isn't it ironic?
Isn't that the same? Like me, isn't that place the same thing where they said this place would be great if it wasn't for all the fucking customers?
Yes. Yeah, and I've actually I've borrowed amply from that to apply it to other scenarios and other settings besides stores, other jobs. Like, this would be great if it wasn't for all the fucking people.
Right.
And sometimes I get myself into trouble. Like, now that I'm old and not everybody has seen the same movies that I have, and I'll quote a line, like if it's from Pulp Fiction or some old movie. Some people who haven't seen the movie, and if I wrongly make the assumption that they have, then I just sound like a bad person, because I'll sound like out of the blue, like I'm saying something murderous or awful. Like, this is, there's the one line in Pulp Fiction after the anal rape scene where Marcellus Wallace, "I'm pretty fucking far from okay."
One of my favorites.
I'll sometimes try that one out, and then I'll get a look where, oh yeah, they haven't seen that movie, and now they just think I made that up. So, like, what's wrong with this guy?
Right. I'm pretty fucking far from okay. One of the greatest of all time. All right, so now I'm going to get to the point why I decided to reach out to you, and I'm going to give you a little bit of my backstory, talk about long story short, because I think it'll help, and I think you'll appreciate. My audience knows some of this, but we'll go through it anyway. So listen, I'm a guy that did not graduate college. I'm a guy that has no business degree or ever got like a business loan. I got D's in high school English. I was a pretty funny guy, and that was always my strength, right? So I knew I could never work for the man. I knew I could never work a straight job. So the easy thing for me was to go try stand-up, right? So I did stand-up comedy for 10 years and was never, like, I toured the country and I lived in LA and all that stuff, but I never made a dime. I was typical struggling artist guy, right? I start this podcast in 2012 after doing my first few races. Can't tell you why, other than it seemed fun. I liked podcasts. I liked this little sport. I instantly become the industry expert guy because A, there wasn't a lot of content, and B, I was half good at it, right? So now I kind of like go, oh, I can go all in on this. I can, content creation is what they call it today. But I just want to write and talk about this stuff. And somehow I've managed to put together a living, right? However, it's in this very specific world. And people were like, well, why don't you try to write for Runner's World or Outside or whatever? And that seemed so daunting to me. Like, how could that ever possibly happen? And, lo and behold, this many years later, a couple of years ago, I got to write my first piece, right? Like, what 5 obstacle races should you try, right? Or what are the best 5, whatever. So then I went and did this event, and I got commissioned to do it. I was like, hey, I want to write about this event. Will you let me write about it? And they said, sure. And then I showed them what I had, and they didn't like it, and they wanted something else. So I gave them something else, and they still didn't like it, so I gave them something else. And eventually they just decommissioned me, right? They paid the kill fee, right? Which is, we're going to give you a few $100s to not write this story.
I've been on. I got one from Slate. I'm sorry.
Well, hang on. You got to let me finish.
I'll tell you real quick that they paid me a 50% kill fee, and I was then able to have that published elsewhere. And I ended up making like $100 more than I would have if Slate had just run it.
Well, that's what I thought was going to happen. I thought, great, they killed it. I can now take this somewhere else. And they didn't want, well, first I can't get people to get back to me. And then they didn't want it. And I was really like struggling because I thought I'd written this really nice thing. And to put it on my site was going to be the last thing because I already know my audience and my audience is going to enjoy it, but I want I need more mainstream links. And lo and behold, I come across this article from you that says essentially, I'm writing these 29-year-olds who don't know what the fuck they want, and all they want is top 5 this and top 10 that, and the best looking people who are running marathons, and fuck them. And I went, you know what? Fuck them. What am I waiting for them to validate me for? I'm putting the fucking story on my site. I'm going to write it the way I want it, and fuck it, and here you go. And so that's what I did, and that's why I reached out to you.
Did you, in the course of your deep diving into my blog, did you find there were a couple that were more like top 10 things you'll never see? It sounds like you were just referencing that, like the top 10 articles you're never going to see in a mainstream publication or one of those. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about, you were saying, Runner's World turned me down, but it turns out Runner's World wants to write what celebrities are doing what marathon or what are the fucking dating tips for runners. Like, you were like, that's what they're interested in, is these BuzzFeed bullshit articles. So fuck them. I'm not going to write that, and I'm going to write what I want to write, and I don't need them to. But you're someone, it's quote unquote easier, I think someone would say, since you've written for them for 20 years and I haven't. But it still inspired me to do the same thing of like, I don't need to them. I can still try to contribute to them, but they're not going to magically tell me I'm good or not. I know what I'm capable of.
Right. And it's not about, it's like anything else in writing, honestly, because you probably are turning out highly entertaining content. When I started writing for running magazines, what happened was it was 1998. And so there was a young internet that consisted largely of email and static websites, like mine looks like. And I've had some version of that up since 99. I've had a blog of some sort since 2004. So it's kind of funny because I was sort of ahead of the whole technology. You couldn't call it social media back then, but when I first put up my website, I was one of the very few runners who was even at my level who had a personal web page. Most people who had personal web pages back then were people who knew more about computers and coding. Like HTML is not a computer language. I did some actual coding when I was a little kid in BASIC. Anyway, so back then, the two big national running magazines were Running Times and Runner's World, and I liked Running Times. And back then, a woman named Gordon Bakulis, who was a 2:34 marathoner, was the editor. So I emailed her with some ideas, and I sent her some writing samples that she liked, and she thought it was good stuff. And my first published piece was a back page humor piece, and just a one pager, and it was about my experience watching the New England Cross Country Championships in Manchester, and some of the funny things that well-meaning parents and coaches say to encourage runners. Because what are you really going to tell them? Because I remember this one guy was yelling at what I assume was his son. I hope he wasn't the coach, but this kid who was way up in the field, he was like 10th or 12th at the New Englands. He's coming up the home stretch. I hear this guy yelling, "Hurry up, Johnny." I'm like, hurry up. That's the funniest thing I've ever heard. Like he was taking out the trash.
Right.
Like, hurry up. Or you hear these nervous coaches going on giving like totally conflicting advice to their kids. Like, now run a smart race, but you got to get out quick and establish position. like run your own race, but hang on this guy's shoulder from the start. I'm like, okay. It's almost like, make sure you run up that hill, but coast the whole way.
Right.
All right. So that was my first published piece, and that opened the door for me to write a bunch of different things. So if you wanted to propose something to an editor back then, you could either email them, just like now, or you could actually send something in the postal mail, like a query. And it was harder to find email addresses for magazines back then, because it wasn't like now where anybody can go and click on a contact us link. And so by the time you discovered all this, you're up against who knows how many thousands of other people with similar ideas. And obviously there is no way to make your actual contact message stand out from the others, right? Because everybody's got an inbox. You have to simply hope that yours gets open and something jumps out at people right off the bat. Like, you can't send them a more colorful envelope. It's whatever. You could put something in the subject line. So in a way, reaching out to editors to try to get something published is easier. But that's, if you are sending quality stuff, that's almost a disadvantage, because you're up against everybody who's sending garbage. It's just like now where everybody can apply for a job with one click, like through monster.com or the big services. One of my good friends out here has to handle the job applications for her small workplace, and most of the people don't fucking read anything.
Right.
Other than we're hiring. This friend works at an art gallery, and she's got these fucking gomers that don't read what the job description or requirements are, but she's forced to go through all this because she has to open. So all the qualified people get, by definition, kind of bumped. So that's what you're up against. And I wanted to back up and say, if you did stand up for that long, then I would think that the idea of getting nervous for a race is probably not even on your radar, because that has to be the scariest goddamn thing I can think of. I would be petrified. And Doug Stanhope is my favorite comedian.
Oh, dude, he's amazing.
Yeah, another guy, Bill Burr, Boston area guys.
Right.
Stanhope is by far the nicest thing to come out of Worcester ever.
Right. Well, I can tell you that what stand-up has helped, honestly, more than anything, is from sort of the sales perspective. Like, if the business I had before this was actually a staffing company, which is funny what you just talked about. The way we used to weed people out was, the job ads back then, it was a lot of Craigslist, and it would say subject must say, whatever that was. So that we weeded out 80% of people, right? Because they just would put whatever they fucking wanted in the subject, right? And then in the email specifically, we'd say, we need these 3 things, right? You just put like a sentence in there, and you can tell the people who didn't bother to read it. And so you can just ignore all those. And then you get the mostly pretty sharp people because, they wrote, we want you to list, your 3 favorite sandwiches or whatever, right? Just something to get it off the thing, right? But when I would have to go into a room and sort of pitch or sell, like, you can't scare me more than an audience who's booed me or an audience who's looked at me and just like the dread of, like, worse than booing is no laughs, is just silence. So I think that's I think that's what stand-up has taught me more than anything, is handling rejection, thinking quick on my feet. And again, finally figuring out, I'm a late bloomer, dude. I'm 47 now. I'm figuring out finally how to apply, since I'm not going to be a famous stand-up or a sitcom writer, applying what I'm good at to this thing, which is called making goofy videos about shoe reviews, and people like them. You know what I mean?
Pretty much everybody I know that has a successful podcast and finds a real home there describes almost exactly like you did, like knowing that any kind of working for somebody else or any kind of organized environment, it's not that you don't have the sense of commitment. If anything, you're 10 times as energetic as anybody else. But it's just more the need to have creative control. I'm not saying that everybody that describes themselves as a slacker student in high school goes on to be good at what you're doing. I'm just saying that everybody that does kind of make it in podcasting describes that kind of background. You see what I'm saying? It's not that every A becomes B. It's that everybody who is B can look back and you've got that in common with. Does that sound about right?
No, totally.
Everybody who's in comedy or podcasting, you don't see people who are like, well, for 10 years, anybody who actually aspired to fall into line and be part of a hierarchical organization where they put a lot of stock in getting a promotion from assistant to the regional manager to assistant regional manager, that's not really in your personality. And I'm kind of the same way, because I have successfully dodged full-time employment for a long time now. And I still complain about my life.
Because you're a crotchety Bostonian, that's why.
Apparently so. And But I like having a blog now, and I like the fact that it doesn't. The one thing about social media that I can't really appreciate, and I mean that in a literal, can't empathize with the whole mentality, is trying to drive up follower numbers for the sheer sake of it.
Right.
Because honestly, if I had 50,000 followers or whatever, I know that I would be just as susceptible to buying into my own bullshit as other people. Like the fact that you have a high number of followers is an opinion validating thing. And I see people doing that, and they just say stupid things like a lot of religious accounts have this for them, whatever. I have to, you can say, I don't want to knock religion broadly, but some of the real rabid ones, that are just antithetical and limiting freedoms and the anti-gay and the anti-whatever. Accounts like that tend to have a lot of followers. And that's in spite of the fact that they might be just churning out counterfactual stuff. And you can see that if you've got whatever you're talking about, if you had that many, if I had 50,000 likes every time I turned around and stuck my ass into a webcam and just farted into it, basically, then I would start to think that farting into a webcam was an effective means of getting an idea across.
I would pay $9.99 a month for that. But speaking of which,
I'm sure that people do. But any idea that I come up with is not. Do you ever Google stuff like words that you make up or terms that you think you might have made up because you didn't get them from anybody, so you Google them, and sure enough, somebody else has already fucking come up with it.
But speaking of which, here's what else turned the corner for me that I made the right decision. Is I started to look for. I Googled something and a Runner's World link came up, and after I clicked a couple of times, you know what it said?
What did you search for exactly?
Well, I'm saying the eventual thing that happened is, it said, "This is your last free article. Please pay us to keep reading." Yeah. And in 2019, if you think I'm going to pay for and Runner's World is doing this. Runner's World is now behind a fucking paywall. Okay.
I'm well aware of what they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was like literally the day after I basically took your advice and was like, okay, like clearly they're on the way out. Like if you can't make an online if you can't sell magazines anymore, which you can't, and you can't make an online platform work through advertising, and you think readers are going to pay for what the world has is nothing but free fucking content. Every time I turn on my television, there's another app that goes, "Want more free stuff? Want this movie?" So anyway, they're dunzos, dude. The days are over.
Here's some context for my crotchiness, because when you see me talk about the world of writing for running publications, here's sort of the deal. And I got a little bit of a start minutes ago. So I was a senior writer for Running Times for about 12 years. And that was not a job. It was just a title. It meant I was contractually obligated to turn out, I don't know, like one article a year. I couldn't write for Runner's World because that was Running Times' competitor.
Right.
I could write for like Marathon and Beyond, or if I wrote for Men's Fitness, I had a couple articles, but those are not direct competitors of Running Times. So then 2009, I think it was, Rodale, the parent company of Runner's World, bought Running Times. And nobody really saw that coming. And for years, while I was a writer for Running Times, I would kind of make fun of Runner's World and their whole, their idea. They had articles about what kind of makeup to wear to a race. And I'm not making that up. Or like a whole thing, like if a runner goes by and they smile, should I smile back or should I? I'm like, is that really an issue? And so I'm like, I guess it sort of is, but I'm like, So Runner's World bought Running Times and slowly began to sort of dismantle it. And it got discontinued maybe 2014. So they absorbed it and eventually shit it out because there was just, you could see it coming. So even though I have never actually written a single piece for Runner's World and have consistently maligned Runner's World, all of my archived articles are now on the Runner's World website. And so I get people who are newer to running that say, oh, this guy was a writer for Runner's World for a long time. No, but they have the rights to all my shit. So that's where it is.
Well, here's what's funny. So here's what's funny. This current article I'm looking at is what exactly is a tempo run? Okay, and it's by Kevin Beck and the editors of Runner's World, August 22nd, 2018, which means they are repurposing the article. They change a few words around, and they own it. And by the way, I'm guessing don't give you a dime for it.
No, they don't. And I was actually going to bring that up because that's another thing where I don't care that I'm not getting royalties for the clicks, because I'm sure that long ago I turned over all those rights when I signed the original contract, and that's not even really on my radar. What does bother me is that the editor of Running Times, Jonathan Beverly, for years, he came into the profession as sort of a aspiring fiction writer. So he let me get away with all sorts of more literary metaphors, going into the weeds, stuff that was really non-essential to the article, but I kind of like to do because it was my personal touch. Whether it was clever or not, it was sort of more not just the bare bones. If you compare, and you've probably done this because I blogged about this, what the original 1999 article looked like about tempo runs versus Kevin Beck and the editors, they took out all fucking good stuff about the guy with the nipple ring. It was a real person. I don't know his name. Yeah, Kevin Beck and the editors of Runner's World was sort of like, what if you had a stand-up routine that you were particularly proud of, even if it was just on YouTube and you didn't make money for it? What if somehow somebody else owned the right to that, and then 15 years later, it's Matt and the owners of Haha Weekly, whatever. And yeah, it's got some of the same topics and it's got some of the same jokes, but they've sanitized it, and it's now for like an elementary school audience, and it's sort of the same content, but it's, of course, you'd be like, well, fuck that. I'm not even going to link to that except to make fun of it. So yeah, and Competitor, who I also recently had a field day with, because they do the rock and roll stuff. And for years, I wrote for them when the editor was a guy who, interestingly enough, another Massachusetts guy, I sort of helped him get his start in the running publishing world. He's a younger guy. You've heard of him, I'm sure. He does the, now I'm trying to remember.
Is it Bart?
The Morning Shakeout. Mario Fraioli.
Oh, okay. I don't know him.
Great guy. Very bright. He thinks kind of like I do about running in a way. Like he comes at it from more, I think he was a philosophy major in college. But anyway, he was in the same running club I was for a long time, Central Mass Striders, but years behind. So anyway, he consulted me for advice about how to get published in Running Times when he was still working for the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. So I gave him Jonathan Beverly's email address, and I think I helped him with his query. It's kind of funny to think about now because he is so much further ahead than anybody in the world of running publishing. But anyway, I helped him with that. I mean, I think he would have had his article published anyway. So then when he later became the web editor for Competitor, I could send him a proposal for pretty much anything and guarantee that it would be published. Like even probably my laundry list for the week or whatever. I'm like, okay. And so, but when he left, Brian Metzler was another guy who was their editor-in-chief at the time. He lives out here and he's gone. They have repurposed or reprinted some of my articles with a fresh date on it. I don't even really care. I mean, in a way that makes people think that I'm still writing for running magazines, I guess. But I don't ever get notice of this. They don't ever say originally published on such and such. So it's a little misleading. It's sort of a lot misleading.
Well, I'm okay with the not originally published on as to make it seem relevant, but it would be nice for someone to send you a note. Hey, it would actually be smart for them to say, hey, we're resharing this. Maybe you could, right? That would even be smart on their part. And you'd be like, well, no way, because you turned it into garbage. But interestingly, that they don't even bother to write you.
Well, most of these companies now, like Competitor, another one, have you heard of Motive Running?
No, I think maybe.
They are way more focused on events and very, very non-focused on content. And I completely understand the economics of that, because it's almost like what you just said. Like, why should they pay people to turn stuff out that somebody can turn out probably for free just as well?
Well, no, they should.
It's already on a blog.
No, I'm saying they should pay for the content, but they shouldn't pay to read it. The content is free, and then you figure out other ways to monetize.
Right. Actually, yeah, no, I agree, but they're all terrible companies, so they're not going to do that. Like a competitor was already bad before they got bought by the Chinese company that also owns Iron Man.
Right.
I expect that if there's the closest thing they could possibly do to actually setting the whole thing on fire is what they're going to do. Like, if you could actually get everybody running into a huge warehouse and fill it full of sarin gas, that's basically what they're doing.
If I were a guy that pulled quotes, which I'm typically not, I just put out the whole episode. But if I were like pull up little things to like put on Instagram, you are giving me doozies.
Well, that's how I've always envisioned some of these running forums where people are constantly fighting, like Let's Run, where you can be anonymous.
Right.
And I think it's horrible.
Of course.
I picture that like some huge biker bar where everybody is just brawling and nobody knows anybody else's name. So it's a free for all versus more real conversations. But yeah, so my whole thing was, this piece for Outside Magazine was in process for so long. I mean, if you read all that, you obviously know why. I just got sick of being lied to and being told this is going to be, we're working on other stuff. This is not a priority.
Right.
And meanwhile, the priority was all this garbage. And I'm like, it's not like you don't have room to publish this. This is not in print. There's not only so much room. It's bits and bytes.
Right.
So, and I also happen to know that the person in charge of that was in the middle of trying to start, her own little side project throughout this. So I decided, I became not quite paranoid, but I was sort of like, well, I have a feeling that they think that their writers will just put up with this because $600 is a decent chunk of change for this shit nowadays. So they figure, well, this guy's not really going to pick up his ball and go home. He's just going to wait indefinitely and quit bugging me at some point, and maybe I'll publish it. And I thought to myself, no, because they fucked up the story. Like, the actual story was changing all the time. And the thing that pisses me off the most is I had interviewed all these people on the premise that this was going to get published and their efforts for free in the running community were going to be appreciated. I don't give a fuck at this point about getting my name in print or being on a website somewhere. And granted, I'm not so well off that $600 is nothing, but I reached a point where even if they print this, it's going to be like an article about how to connect to the internet in 2004 or something. I mean, it was rapidly going out of date. I don't have to get into all the reasons for that here, but it had to do with being able to do free webcasts of high school track meets that haven't yet been cannibalized by Flow Track and Mile Split. Another horrible bunch of motherfuckers right there. But,
my wife just walked in the office. I really wish she could hear you, but when I take out the headphones, it gives it echo. But I'm going to make her listen to this.
I assume you're recording it so you can always play it back for her later.
No, she'll listen. She'll listen if I tell her to listen. But listen, I gotta wrap this up. But A, I want to have you back, and B, maybe there's a way I can, I would love to publish your stuff or even do, more stuff with you because that's
sorry. I probably didn't get to 15% of what you wanted to talk about.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't. But
I'd be happy to do this again because I love it, and I usually will go and do my due diligence on people that I'm going to talk to. For one thing, I'm curious about anybody who's trying to be in running media in any way. But the reason, basically, I prefer cold conversations to some extent. So I didn't want to know too much about this before I did it because I wanted it to be what it is. But I would love to do this again. And yeah, but now I'll probably, I'm going to be a subscriber and everything. I'm pretty selective about my podcast, but there are some good ones. And I did listen to, I know Nicole Miracle a little bit. She's out here.
Yeah.
I don't know her that well, but she used to run for a group that I occasionally would go to. So I knew she was more into adventure, or probably not adventure, maybe the Spartan races.
Yeah, it's obstacle racing is the overall thing.
Strong as nails, man. She's got the strongest looking quads I've ever seen on a thin person.
All right, told you you were going to enjoy that guy. Drop me a note. Let me know if you liked it. Drop him a note. Say, hey, man, I heard your stuff, and I like it. I'm sure he'd be happy to hear from you. We will do these every Tuesday. And Davis and Chase every bloody Thursday. Video content coming out. The new Tough Mudder video is out. Hope you saw that. The Tough Mudder LA. Race recap, all the obstacles. We've also got the bling video. I'm going to be providing a trail bling video from the first trail race. Here's what you get when you race Spartan Trail. Lots of good stuff to come. If you want to donate to the Patreon, like so many others, I've been on that train. Go ahead and go to patreon.com/obstacle racing media, and for as little as $1 a month, you can join in on the fun and support great content that you are enjoying by me. That didn't come out right. Who cares? Love you, miss you, mean it. I've got to run.